Hi guys, obviously on the boat again. Excuse me. Expecting a mechanic soon. Got a battery acting up. I'm not sure which one it is. I got 4 batteries, but these interior lights were not working a little while ago. I managed to get the engine started and suddenly they work. I don't know what happened. There's a breaker in there somewhere that tripped. We're going to be looking at chapters 4 and 5 in McLaren. And he says, we begin our quest for a new kind of Christian faith by questioning the storyline. What does he mean? What's the storyline? What's the overarching story of the Bible? Really? Do you hear a lot of preachers tell it? It's get saved. Get them saved. That's pretty much it. Then they go to Bible study classes and they put money in the offering and so on. In other words, just wait till you die or for the second coming, whichever comes first. That's a very thin storyline. I think it's the wrong question to ask, is McLaren right? I think it's, how does what McLaren is saying resonate with me and with my generation? Because if you were to reach your generation, you have to know what your generation is looking for. And you have to be in the middle of it. Not on the sidelines, not preaching from on high, in the middle of it. As an old country song says, in the mud and the blood and the beer, you got to be in the middle of the mud. You got to get muddy. Because that's where they are. That's where they live. You got to get down where people live. And doing that, you get dirty. We all have, if you've taken psychology, you know that we all have lenses through which we all look. By that I mean biases. These are the lenses that shape how we see the world. I know what mine are because I've studied them for a long time, and some of them I did not like. For example, what's your racial bias? So you don't have it? Really? I was raised in a system that said that white males were superior to everybody else. Yep. If you're a white male, you had it made. That's what's called white privilege. And yes, I have benefited from it. Even though I come from a lower working class family, I still benefited from it. I never met anybody of color who had anything other than a manual labor job until I joined the Army. And my first real experience with racial discrimination actually happened in our church. My father owned a wholesale produce company, and meaning we went to work at 2 a.m, 6 days a week. And but we had a gentleman working for us. Never occurred to me that he had a last name. He was black, and his name was Freddie. Because she didn't call him by the last name. You called him by their first name. That was the culture. Freddie was huge. He was about 6'2", 350 pounds. And a lot of that was fat, but oh my gosh, was he strong. His upper arms, his biceps were like fat. And one time I was working with him. I always got along with him great. He was very gentle with me. I asked him, I was probably 14, 15. I said, Freddie, wow, how'd you get such huge arms? Wow, how'd you get so strong? He says, working on the chain gang in Florida. What? Yeah, chain gang. We were loading cases of grapefruit in the fields. My job was to pick them up and load them up, pick them up above my head and, so they could load them on the truck. I did that 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. What were you in prison for? Killed a man. Huh? You? Yeah. What happened? Oh, he came at me with a razor and I hit him once. Killed him. He sent me to prison for murder. Wow. Well, my dad invited Freddie to church. We picked him up in the bad part of town, took him with us to church, sat up front, and of course he's the only black face in a totally white congregation. The next day my father got some phone calls saying, "Don't you ever bring a nigger into this church again." Yeah, the N-word. That was my first instance of real, upfront, full-on racial discrimination. It was not pleasant. If you hear an engine running, that's my neighbor's boat. They're getting ready to go. And it shocked me. But my whole worldview was based on what I knew and how I was raised. That did not change until I went into the Army at the age of 18. Barely out of high school. And in the Army, suddenly I had black drill sergeants, officers. One of my drill sergeants was Cuban. Some were Mexican. And it was a shock to my system because I had never experienced anyone who was black in a position of authority. And I began to realize that my entire upbringing was wrong. Well, we all have biases. I still have some. Of course we do. They shape the way we see things. What are yours? Do you know? Have you looked at them? Bias is something that gives you an instantaneous emotional reaction to something that happens. I think another way of looking at it is, how do you, and recognizing it is, what makes you feel uncomfortable when you are around people who are different from you? What triggers that little bit of, I experienced it, what was it now, 16 years ago in South Africa, the country of South Africa, not southern Africa, but the southernmost country in Africa. You got down to the Cape of Good Hope, there's nothing between you and the Antarctic except ocean. And I suddenly realized in one place that I was the only white face in about 1,000 black faces, and I'd never experienced that before. It was like, oh dear. Yeah. So my old biases came out. I felt threatened. They're hard to get rid of. What are yours? I've worked with people who called Mexican immigrants wetbacks, beaners, all kinds of derogatory things. What do you think of when you hear the phrase illegal immigrants? Well, there's no such thing as an illegal person. Not in the sight of God. The Bible says, welcome the stranger. Take the foreigner in as if they are family. But many Christians say, no, I'm not about to do that. Are you kidding me? No way. How about you? What are you biased against? How about rednecks? You've heard that phrase before. Yeah, I'm from the hills of Kentucky and Tennessee, and I don't know a whole lot, you know. Do you see them as stupid? They're not. They talk differently, yes. So the question of bias is, how do you react to people who are different from you? Now, my wife and I used to spend a lot of time in Hawaii. We almost moved there. Didn't. and regretted it later when the real estate prices went back up. But we spent a lot of time there, and we were always curious about the culture. And the native Hawaiians don't like us a whole lot. They call us haoles. And they'd rather we weren't there. Why? We stole their country from them. Hawaii was a sovereign nation. Yeah. We took it over. We said, we want these islands. You're a weak people. We're going to take control. And we did. And the Hawaiians, and we stole their land. We desecrated their holy places. We took over. They resent us. But my wife and I have always gotten along. Why? We tried to learn the culture. We tried to learn the language. We realized that we were the outsiders. And to win them, we needed to learn about them. And we did. And we got invited to what's called a hukilau. A hukilau is basically a big beach party. And everybody brings some food. There's music, there's dancing, there's food, there's conversation. It's just a lot of fun. And a good hukilau can go all night long. We didn't last that long. But we were invited for this very simple reason that we tried to learn some of the Hawaiian language and use the language. They were appreciative of the fact that we were trying to respect their culture. Now, what am I talking about? Do African Americans have a different culture than we do as white boys? Yes. In many, many places, yes. Do they worship differently? Oh, yes. Am I serious? Yes. I suggest you go to Morning Star Baptist Church in Pasco sometime for a worship service. It's an African American church, and you're going to experience a type of worship that's interesting. If you want boring, there's a Christian Reformed church in Kennewick. I suggest you go there. Different culture, different roots. So what McLaren is saying is our lenses that operate below the consciousness levels are how we shape what our understanding. You know, most of our decisions are emotional. They're not rational. They're based on emotion. Now, the church I was raised in was one of those, you really didn't want to go there. I didn't have any choice. I disliked the place from as early as I can remember, because it was a judgmental place, seemed to be an angry place, where God was always pissed off and needed to be appeased. And if you didn't appease him, well, you know, I lived in fear that someday I was going to cross God enough that he was going to hit me with a lightning bolt, turn me into a human French fry. And I'm serious. But then I started doing something really, really dangerous. I started to actually read the Bible. Now, I was precocious. I get it. I know that. I mean, I read William Shirer's 1,500-page history of the rise and fall of the Third Reich when it came out in 1960. I was 12 years old. So yeah, I was a bit precocious when it came to reading. I was reading in 1 John chapter 4, and verses 4 through 22 just jumped out at me and grabbed me by the face. More than once, the writer states unequivocally, God is love. Is. That is a state of constant being, always. Unchanging, is. Not God loves us a lot. Nope. God is love. And so I began at a very early age, I was around 12 or so, to reject what I was getting in church. But I couldn't get out of it. Dad was chairman of the board. Mom taught Sunday school. Nothing I could do. But I tried. You see, your generation understands. They know that Christianity is more than get them saved, put some bucks in the offering plate, and you're good to go. See you next Sunday. They know it's more than that, and they know that we don't do it. That's an inclusive, too inclusive. But they know that probably the majority of so-called Christians don't do it. They know that. And so they reject the current interpretation of the biblical narrative. So what McLaren is saying is the current biblical narrative is too narrow, it's too small, it does not actually fit reality. And reality is based on our biases, on how we see things. Now, I also, the group I came up out of also insisted, maybe you're in one of these groups, that the Bible, every word of the Bible is literally true. And if you don't believe part of it, you don't believe any of it. Now, that's the most ridiculous argument I've ever heard when you think of it logically. But they've been told it often enough that the Bible is literally true and there's no error in it, no mistakes. Sometimes they know the Bible better than we do, because I'm going to show you unequivocally 2 places where the Bible contradicts itself. Okay? All right. These are the reasons they walk away from it. They know that what we're saying, or what some people are saying, just isn't true. Case in point, have you ever read Genesis 1 and 2 without stopping? Now I want you to, before you continue with this video, I want you to stop the video. I want you to go to the Populi website, to the Worship Arts website, and I want you to go to the discussion page and download the paper that is there, okay, for today. And I want you to read it. And you'll get to page 2, and the top of page 2 is going to say, stop. Read Genesis 1 and 2 without stopping. I think you're in for a shock, because you're going to find that there are 2 creation stories, and they do not play well together. Serious. Okay? Come to part 2 when you've done that.